Somewhere today, you're going to meet someone new, and before they say a single word, your brain will have already decided something about them. Trustworthy or not, safe or not, worth your time or not, all of it in under a second, based almost entirely on the shape of their face. The real reason why is far stranger than simple first impressions. You'd assume trust is earned. A track record, a conversation, time spent together, watching how someone behaves under pressure. That's the story you probably tell yourself about how trust works. But the actual data on how humans judge faces suggests something far more primitive is running underneath all of that. And it has almost nothing to do with character. Start with a simple experiment. In the early 2000s, psychologist Alexander Todorov at Princeton University showed people photographs of unfamiliar faces for just 1/10 of a second. Barely enough time to consciously register a feature, let alone form a reasoned opinion. And yet, participants confidently rated each face on trustworthiness, competence, and likability, with remarkable consistency across different viewers. Give people more time to look, even several extra seconds, and the ratings barely changed. Whatever judgment your brain makes about a face, it makes almost instantly, and then mostly just sticks with it. Doesn't that unsettle the story you tell yourself about being a fair judge of character? If trust were really built through observation and evidence, more time looking at someone should change your opinion. It barely does. So, what exactly is your brain measuring in that first tenth of a second? This is where the shape of the face itself becomes the real story. Psychologist Leslie Zebrowitz at Brandeis University spent decades studying what researchers call the baby face effect. The tendency for faces with rounder cheeks, larger eyes relative to face size, a smaller nose, and a higher forehead to be judged as warmer, more honest, and less threatening, regardless of the actual person's age or personality. Zebrowitz found this effect held up across cultures, across age groups, and even when the baby-faced individual in question was a fully grown adult with none of the personality traits typically associated with childlike innocence. Why would an adult's face, simply by being round and soft-featured, trigger the same warm response an actual infant does? The answer traces back to a much older idea in biology. In 1943, ethologist Konrad Lorenz proposed something he called Kindchen schema, roughly translated as baby schema, a specific cluster of features, large head relative to body, big eyes, round cheeks, small chin, that reliably triggers caregiving instincts across many species, not just humans. Lorenz noticed this pattern wasn't limited to actual babies. Puppies, kittens, baby birds, even certain cartoon characters engineered to exploit the same proportions, all trigger a similar automatic softening in how observers respond to them. Think about what that means for the adult standing in front of you with soft, round features. Their face is, in a very real biological sense, quietly triggering the same ancient circuitry that once existed purely to make you protective of a helpless infant. You're not evaluating their character. You're pattern matching their bone structure against a template built by evolution to keep vulnerable young alive. This creates a strange and slightly uncomfortable problem, one that Zebrawitz's research took seriously, rather than brushing aside. If baby-faced adults are automatically judged as more trustworthy, does that judgment actually track anything real about their behavior? Her studies found, somewhat disturbingly, that it mostly doesn't. Baby-faced individuals in her research were not, on average, more honest, more competent, or more reliable than their more angular, mature-featured counterparts. The trust was real in the sense that people genuinely felt it and acted on it. The correlation with actual trustworthiness was not, so why would evolution build such an easily fooled system? The likely answer involves trade-offs rather than perfect accuracy. For most of human history, in small groups where you interacted repeatedly with the same handful of people, a quick facial snap judgment probably worked well enough as a starting point, something to be revised as you gathered more direct evidence over time. The problem only emerges in the modern world, where you routinely make consequential first impressions of total strangers you'll never interact with again, long enough to correct that initial snap judgment, a salesperson, a stranger asking for directions, a face on a screen asking for your vote or your money. There's a flip side to this story, too, and it's just as revealing. Todorov's research also mapped which facial features push judgments in the opposite direction toward perceived untrustworthiness. Downturned mouths, narrow set eyes, angular jaws, and lowered brows consistently triggered wariness, even on faces that were, by any objective measure, perfectly neutral in expression. Some of his most striking findings came from digitally exaggerating these features on a single photograph, morphing the exact same face gradually toward more trustworthy or more untrustworthy proportions, watching viewers snap judgments shift dramatically despite the underlying identity never actually changing. This raises an uncomfortable question worth sitting with. How many real judgments about real people, job candidates, jurors evaluating a defendant, voters sizing up a stranger on a debate stage, are being quietly shaped by bone structure rather than behavior? Legal researchers have specifically studied this concerning courtroom decisions. Defendants with more baby faced features have, in multiple studies, received systematically different treatment in mock trials and even some real sentencing outcomes, sometimes lighter treatment for certain offenses, sometimes harsher treatment for others, depending on the specific crime and how it interacts with perceived innocence versus perceived capability for premeditation. The face itself, entirely independent of the facts of the case, was doing measurable work in the room. Here's what makes this especially strange to think about. You almost certainly believe your own judgments of new people are based on evidence, on how someone speaks, how they carry themselves, small cues you've picked up from experience. And to some extent, that's true, layered on top of the snap judgment. But underneath all of that reasoning sits a much older, faster system, one that finished its verdict before your conscious mind even had a chance to weigh in, built not to judge character accurately, but to protect helpless infants, millions of years before trust between strangers was ever a daily requirement of human life. So the next time you meet someone and feel an immediate, inexplicable sense of warmth or wariness toward them, something you can't quite explain with anything they've actually said or done, pay attention to what's happening underneath that instinct. It might have very little to do with who they actually are. It might simply be the shape of their cheekbones, quietly speaking a language older than trust itself. One your brain learned to answer to long before either of you were born.